Last summer, we spent 3 months living out our road trip bucket list across the western states of the USA, something we'd been saving to do for a really, really long time. In total, we spent 89 days traveling across 12 states, racking up an impressive 12,500 miles in a rental car. So today I'm going to go and break down every single penny that we spent making this trip a reality. I'm going to share every single category that we spent money on, and I think it's going to be less than you think. So I'm going to go ahead and break this down into categories because there is 3 main categories where we spent pretty much all of our money. And category 1 will be the car, category 2 is accommodation, and category 3 is food and drink. And I'm going to show you exactly what we spent our money on within these categories so that you can see the exact costs of doing a big trip like this and tailor your budget to your own personal travel preferences. Because let's be honest, not everybody's going to spend as much on beer as we did. I'm also going to show you some of the ways in which we kept our costs down in certain areas and made it a little bit more budget friendly than it otherwise could have been. If you are only interested in the total cost of this trip, I'm going to put the timestamp below so that you can skip ahead to that. I'm also going to put categories in the timeline so that you can skip ahead to any categories you've more interest in. Okay, so category 1 is the car. Our total car costs for this trip were $4,620.63, and that is broken down into 2 main spends. The car rental, which was $2,769, and gas, which was $1,851.63, which at nearly 12,500 miles works out at around about 15 cents per mile. So let's start with the car rental. We don't permanently live in the US, so we don't own a car. So for this trip, we've rented one. And the company that we chose to do this with was Enterprise. And because it's not always obvious on YouTube, I'm just going to go ahead and say, we were not paid to say this. We don't get any affiliate links, any money from this. This is just our personal preference. We chose Enterprise because they were the cheapest. And honestly, we pretty much always use Enterprise. And again, I'm not paid to say that. I'm not getting anything out of this. This is just the facts. One of the main reasons we do use Enterprise is because of the free unlimited miles. And this is kind of important for this trip because we actually drove 12,450 miles over 89 days. And this works out at 140 miles per day, which is well over what most companies will give you in your free miles per day. So factoring the free miles was a really big part of our decision. We also managed to get this for a little bit cheaper than we otherwise would because we didn't rent directly from the airport. I actually went into the map in Enterprise and I manually went through all of the neighborhood branches just to see the cheapest deal that was close to the airport. And we ended up picking a neighborhood branch that was around 20 or 30 minutes from the airport. So when we landed at LAX, we literally just booked an Uber to the location, which cost us around $30. But we actually ended up saving a couple $1,000s just by doing this, as opposed to renting it directly from the branch inside LAX airport. So it's definitely worth spending a little bit of time comparing different locations if you land in a big city like Los Angeles. We also saved some money on the daily rate by renting it for a longer period of time. Because we rented it for the full 3 months, we ended up getting a monthly discount, which meant that the daily rate was less overall than it would have been if we'd have rented it for a shorter duration. We actually posted a cost breakdown on our TikTok page a couple of months ago, and we got lots of comments that were like, why don't you just buy a car and then sell it before you left? And honestly, we lived in the US the year before this, and we bought a car and then sold a car. And we ended up losing quite a lot of money on it because we only had it for about a year. The problem also is if you are not a resident and you don't have an address, it's really hard to register your car at the DMV. So it's really hard to own a car if you don't live in the US, which we don't anymore. So as someone who is coming to the US as a visitor on a tourist visa, it's kind of impossible to buy a car, or very difficult to buy a car at least. Also, if you factor in the insurance costs and anything that might go wrong with the car whilst you have it, you're also going to lose a little bit of money there. So for us, I think less than $3,000 for 3 months between the two of us was kind of a good deal, in our opinion. That worked out at less than $500 a month per person, which I didn't think was that bad. Okay, now let's talk about the gas prices. We drove through 12 states on this trip, so the gas prices varied a lot. The most we paid for gas was in Southern California at around $6 per gallon, and the least we paid for gas was $3.27 a gallon, and that was in Cortez, Colorado. My biggest recommendation in terms of saving money here would just be to download the Gas Buddy app. This app basically just shows you a map of your local area and all of the gas stations within the area, which shows you where the cheapest gas is at. So instead of having to drive around and look for the cheapest gas or just picking one that's on the road that you're on, you can actually see if there's anything a couple miles out, a 5 or 10 minute drive away. That will save you money. And I feel like we would save like $5 or $10 per tank of gas doing this, but over 3 months, $5 or $10 per tank of gas is quite a lot of money. So definitely download Gas Buddy and definitely check for the cheapest gas in your area. Also, if you've got a US credit card, there are sometimes cashback rewards on certain gas stations, so you can save a little bit of extra money there. All right, next is category 2, and that is accommodation. Again, this is broken down into 2 subcategories. So we have camping, which was $1,262 for 60 nights, and hotels and motels at $2,972 over 27 nights. Most of our camping nights were spent in paid campgrounds, but 6 out of the 60 nights were spent in free dispersed camping spots. And for those of you unfamiliar with dispersed camping, these are essentially legally free sites within BLM land or National Forest land, which is essentially just a patch of ground along a Forest Service road that you are allowed to camp on, or it's an undeveloped and undesignated campsite with no facility, usually on Bureau of Land Management sites. And to find these sites, we use 2 separate apps. We use the Dirt app, and sometimes we would use the Campendium app. You can, of course, also stay in Walmart parking lots for free, but because our rental car wasn't that big, we couldn't really sleep comfortably in the back, so we never really did this. And also, we ended up sleeping in paid campsites a lot more than free sites, just because maybe it's all in our head, but because we're 2 females, we felt a little bit safer just being in a paid campground, especially when there was a camp host and other people around. And also, we just enjoyed the facilities more. We enjoyed having a fire ring, and even if there was no running water in the restrooms or no showers, it was nice just to have a vault toilet to use instead of going in the bushes. I mean, of course, if you feel more comfortable than we did, then you could definitely technically camp for free every single night of your trip. You could sleep in Walmart parking lots, and you could use BLM land or National Forest land to dispersed camp, and you could technically not pay anything the entire trip. That's completely feasible. We just felt a little bit more comfortable in the paid campground, so we preferred to pay for it. But if you have a self-contained vehicle or you just feel more comfortable with it, you can definitely camp for free most nights. And in terms of showers and restrooms, you can use gas stations. You can pay a small amount of money and you can shower at most gas stations. So you could definitely save a lot of money here. And because, like I said, our SUV was a little bit too small to sleep in, we did end up sleeping in a tent every single night when we camped, apart from a couple. And we actually flew to the US with a cheap REI backpacking tent that we bought a few years ago. And on day 8 of our trip, it actually broke. So we had to go out and buy a new one, which is factored into this cost. I think it cost around about $150 just for a cheap 3-person backpacking tent. Most of these paid campgrounds we stayed in were in national parks or just outside of them, sometimes state parks. We did stay in a few private campgrounds like KOA and other private campgrounds, as well as these national park ones. We never really reserved anything more than a few days in advance, and we relied heavily on cancellations, especially in the national parks and around California, where most things were booked up. So we just got lucky most of the time, and we were very flexible with our plans, and that's how we managed to stay at some really cool campsites without having to book months and months in advance. Some of the campgrounds we stayed in, though, were first come, first served, especially in the national forests around Wyoming. These were definitely the cheapest campgrounds we stayed in, around $15 per night, and the most expensive campgrounds we stayed in were the private ones around California. Okay, now the hotels and motels. We spent a total of 27 nights in motels and hotels, which makes the daily average for those 27 nights $110. We did try and stay in motels or hotels as little as possible, and when we did stay in them, we usually stayed in them for 2 nights so that we could have a hot shower and do our laundry and charge our electronics. We usually tried to stay away from the main tourist areas to keep our costs down, but sometimes that was unavoidable, which bumped our cost up quite a lot. We also never actually book the cheapest place in town just because it's usually not worth the saving. I find that if you pay an extra like $10 or $20 a night and find something that's actually got good reviews, then you're going to save yourself a world of pain, because we've stayed in a lot of cheap motels and honestly the neighbors will keep you up at night, the room will smell like smoke. I mean, they're just usually in like seedy areas. So in our experience, if you stay in the cheapest motel in town, it's probably not going to be a pleasant experience, but if you pay a little bit more, it's probably going to be okay. And to book motels, we would usually use booking.com. Again, I don't get any money from saying that, but sometimes we would just use like the Google Hotel Finder. I'm not sure the exact name of it, but we would just compare prices and reviews and, like I said, not stay at the cheapest place in town. And we did spend a little bit of money on our last few days of the trip because we stayed at a fairly nice hotel in San Diego, just because we wanted to relax and have a nice time for the last couple of nights before we flew home. So that did bump our cost up a little bit. Okay, so the third and final category is food and drink. In total, our complete food and drink costs over the 3 months were $3,751.63. And I've broken that down into 3 subcategories. So the first one is the food shop / groceries / supermarket spends, and that is $1,128.34. The next is dining out / takeout / fast food, and that is $1,038.86, which makes the food total $2,167.20. And the third category is drinks, which was basically just alcohol and beer, and that is an embarrassingly high $1,584.43. Okay, so let's just get it out the way first and talk about our extortionate beer and alcohol spends. Yes, we spent a lot on beer. Yes, this is completely unnecessary. Yes, it was a lot of money. However, we both enjoy a beer or two, and this was our vacation, so we decided to spend money on drinking. This cost does include beer that we bought both from the liquor store and also alcohol that we got at bars or restaurants when we went out. Like I said, this is a completely unnecessary spend and could be completely cut out of the budget entirely, especially if you don't drink anything. So that's worth bearing in mind if you are looking to budget a trip like this. If you don't drink or you just will drink less, then you can cut this out entirely. Okay, so next is food. So let's discuss the grocery shopping. As we spent most nights on our trip camping, we usually cooked our own food, and this was both an attempt at spending less money, but also it was very convenient. Because we were camping, we would cook our own food on our little 2-burner stove, and this kind of made more sense because we weren't close to any towns or any food outlets, so we couldn't eat out even if we wanted to. So because we camped in national parks and areas that aren't really populated, it definitely made more sense to cook for ourselves. Our system was just to go to big supermarkets when we passed through a town, and we would stock up with about 5 days worth of food and put it in our cooler. We would buy a giant bag of ice, fill up our cooler, put our food in it, and then as we passed convenience stores or gas stations, we would just buy another bag of ice and top it up so that our food didn't spoil. We mainly just chose the larger supermarkets in the big cities because it meant saving more money, because shopping at general stores and gas stations really adds up. So if we went past the big supermarket, we would just buy everything we needed, and then if we forgot something or we needed to top up, we would just buy it from a local convenience store. We mostly made simple meals for dinner that we could make on our 2-burner stove, and for lunch we would just have like sandwiches or something simple. Okay, eating out and fast food. When we didn't feel like cooking, or if we were staying at a motel, we would either head to a local restaurant or bar, or we would get some kind of fast food. We definitely didn't do this as much as cooking our own food, but we did it more than I thought we might. We generally just preferred to eat at like sports bars or chain restaurants most of the time, because when we weren't cooking our own food, we mostly just craved like fried food, like burgers or chicken tenders or something. So eating in these places definitely kept our costs down for this section. We did also get fast food on quite a few occasions, which again is pretty affordable. So this category definitely could have been a lot higher if we had different food preferences, or if we decided to sit down and eat at proper family restaurants. It definitely could have added up a lot higher. So after adding up all of these categories, our total spends for our 3-month USA road trip were $14,036.79. Honestly, before we went on this trip, I didn't really have any idea what we would spend. We had a rough idea of what we thought we might spend, but we had no like set budget. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but basically we just saved like loads of money for this trip. And we were just like, we spend what we spend as long as it's less than what we have. And I don't think that's a crazy amount of money considering everything that we got to do and see and the fact that we had the car for 3 months. I think that that's kind of a reasonable amount for that sort of trip. And also the fact that this was like a bucket list trip for us. So we knew it was going to cost a lot of money, but it was something that we really, really wanted to do. And I guess we weren't paying rent or anything because we were traveling. So if you factor in your daily costs of life for 3 months, this really isn't too much money between two people. But who knows? What do you think? Is that way too much money to spend on a road trip, or are you actually surprised at the affordability? I actually am genuinely intrigued to know what people think about that. And of course, as always, please like this video if you received any useful information from it. Check out our channel for other travel content, and I will see you in the next one.